Certification and Enforcement Stakeholder Meeting. Appreciate everyone joining us this morning. Uh, if you came to the SBEC meeting in April, it was a Friday the 13th, and now we have another Friday the 13th. I don't know what's going on. We keep scheduling all of our things on Friday the 13th, but I'm excited to see everyone today. I I think we've got most folks that we're anticipating here on the line, so I think we can kick it off. We can transition to the next slide.
Perfect. Sorry, y'all. I was chatting and took the attention away from my second screen.
Just a few reminders in this stakeholder space. Folks can keep themselves muted unless you're speaking. We love to see folks' faces, so if you have the ability to keep your camera on, we appreciate that. It's also always helpful for us if you name yourself with your name and organization. And then, again, this is a stakeholder space, so we really want to hear from y'all, get your input. And so appreciate folks really leaning in and being active participants. If you go to the next slide. Just a quick reminder of the SBEC's mission statement and core principles on this slide. The SBEC does meet 5 times a year. They had, as I said, their most recent meeting on February 13th, and will have their next meeting on April 24th. On the next slide. Just as a reminder of the work that the SBEC oversees and supports, really everything along the life cycle of an educator, from admission into an educator preparation program, all the way through continuing professional education and certificate renewal. The SBEC follows a standard rulemaking process, so you'll hear us use words like proposal and adoption throughout our meeting today. Just as a reminder of what that structure looks like, the SBEC often starts with discussions on specific policy topics, and they don't take any action at that point. That's a really great time for them to hear from stakeholders, get early input, and then the SBEC to give early direction. The formal rulemaking process begins at proposal. So that's where there is rule language that the board is reviewing, editing, providing input on, and then ultimately voting on. After proposal, those rules go out for 30 days of public comment, and then come back to the SBEC for their consideration and adoption. After that process, those rules do go to the State Board of Education for their review, where they can either take no action or they can veto those rules. And so on the whole, this is about a 9-month process, which, if some of y'all have been with us for some time, can sometimes be longer than 9 months. So 9 months really kind of at its shortest. On the next slide, really just want to reinforce the goal for this stakeholder group. This is an open stakeholder space. Appreciate folks who prioritize taking your time to join. This is really a space where we want to get feedback from the field around really all things related to educator preparation, certification, enforcement actions. And then our team also oversees a number of supports to school districts and preparation programs to really help build strong talent pipelines. And so there's also opportunities where we appreciate y'all's input and feedback on those scopes of work as well. We hold these stakeholder meetings 5 times a year. We try to schedule them in between SBEC meetings so we can get early input that can then inform what we share with the board. We've got our meeting today, and our next one will be June 12th. And then we have some norms that we worked with stakeholders to develop a little over a year ago for both stakeholder participation and just how our staff will show up in this space as well. On the next slide, on today's agenda, we have a few priority topics. I'll say Chapter 228 implementation is probably the meatiest of those topics. We're really looking forward to the discussion. But to start, as we traditionally do, if we go to the next slide, We wanted to first give some updates on the outcome of the SBEC's February meeting. So if you go to the next slide, the agenda was short but had a lot in it for our February meeting. So the SBEC considered and took action. So they voted on 5 proposal items. So again, those are the rules. From there, they get posted for those 30 days of public comment, which I do believe for all 5 of these rule chapters goes live today. So that will be posted to our website as well. So the board had some really rich discussions around the proposal, set of proposal items to implement House Bill 2, specifically the prep allotment. So that was Chapter 228, which are their APP requirements, Chapter 227, which are their admissions requirements, and Chapter 230, which are their certification requirements. And we'll go into a little bit more depth today into some of the rules that were ultimately proposed for the EPP requirements and some associated implementation supports that we're planning for early. And then the SBEC also considered and took action on 2 rule chapters that sought to operationalize Senate Bill 571, which was focused on really providing more robust structures around our educator misconduct work. And so they took action to make adjustments to the Code of Ethics and to their disciplinary proceedings. In addition, the board did approve the 24-25 ASEP accreditation statuses for all preparation programs. So those were informed by the outcome of running of the accountability system. So if you have interest in seeing those accreditation statuses for the prep programs across the state, we do have a dashboard on our website that gives all of that information, as well as some of the finer grain performance by index for each preparation program. And then an exciting update that we had a chance during the meeting to introduce the board to a new member of our TEA team, Levi Fuller, who is now serving as our Inspector General of Educator Misconduct. So you all will be seeing him both in these stakeholder spaces and with the SBEC as we go forward. But I want to give Levi a chance to just introduce himself to this group.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. My name is Levi Fuller. I'm the new Inspector General for the TEA. Just a little bit about me is my background is I spent a long time in the Army as a judge advocate, and it's kind of what people normally call a grunt. A couple different deals, a couple different jobs. Significant work in revamping how the Army approached sexual assault allegations. And then once I left the Army, I had some time working at the Attorney General's office as a litigator and counsel before being a chief of staff of the legislature. So the general idea is, we want to curb this awful thing. We want to stop it. We want to protect our kids so they can learn. And I'm excited to be here, and I'm excited to be working with all of you. Thank you.
Thanks, Levi. So as we look towards our agenda today, I'm excited to engage in discussion with y'all, and I'm going to turn it over to Melissa Yoder and her team, who are going to talk through Chapter 228 implementation.
Thanks, Jessica. I'll kick us off here. So I know folks in this room have likely been following more closely than the masses with the work around Chapter 228. And I just want to name, and we'll repeat this over and over again, but we wouldn't be at this point today without the support of y'all, without the feedback you've been providing since, gosh, September, as we have finessed and developed and refined this policy to implement HB2. So my first thing I want to say is thank you. And so with that, y'all know the timeline well, but we're not at adoption yet. That's a little aggressive to highlight the adoption there, but we're heading there. So we just came out of proposal, and recall, as Jessica noted, there's been some significant rulemaking that has been occurring to establish the SBEC's policy for the Chapter 228 implementation, and then the related, as Lori calls them, the three amigos, Chapter 227, updated admission requirements, and then our certificate requirements in Chapter 230. So ton of work here today. And then I know folks are very well aware of this, but in those conversations with stakeholders, we really have tried to make sure the focus has been on keeping it centered around effective implementation of statute to make sure that we are able to implement that in a meaningful way. We are not adding in extra ancillary components that cloud or take away from the hand at task. So task at hand. So I just wanted to note that here that your input has been really important to get us to really, really tailor the implementation proposals. Um, During our February discussion, during the proposal discussion, we centered the conversation around prep requirements and then additional HB2 requirements. So we're going to use that same structure today as we walk through some of the implementation considerations that we're currently working through, and we're excited to start to discuss with you all today. Just to anchor us a bit, though, and here we have the commissioner rulemaking timeline side by side with the SBEC's timeline. Jessica provided a nice overview of the rulemaking process in the intro, but just to ground us a bit, we are, as of today, heading into that public comment period for the proposal rules that the SBEC accepted in the February meeting. And then that will take us into the adoption, item adoption in April 2026. I'll name here that I think one of the keynotes on Jessica's overview was that there's not a lot of substantive changes that happen in this public comment period. So today we won't be taking any further refinements to policy. It'll be more of a policy update and then discussion of implementation considerations. And that is the area where we need y'all's input. And then in June, it would theoretically head to SBOE for approval. And then there would be July would mean there is that would be the effective date, and then rules would be implemented generally as of 9/1/2026. That would be the start of the rule implementation. We'll go over those timelines shortly. So for today's discussion, we're going to provide a brief summary of some key policy changes for those areas for prep implementation and the broader HB2 implementation. We're going to communicate with you some implementation supports, considerations, and highlight high-level timelines where applicable. And then I'll highlight briefly some forthcoming communication channels to anticipate. Because it's important to gather y'all's input today, we're going to have pause points in each section to elicit input from folks, but it's helpful to us when we're able to document your questions, your considerations, etc. So we have put together a Padlet today. Josh Jones is going to be sharing that Padlet in the chat. I have a little screen grab here. There's a plus sign for each topic that we'll walk through where you'll be able to add any notes, considerations, questions that you have. And this will inform development of forthcoming webinars and communication tools as key FAQs we want to address, etc. So if you're thinking of something that we're not already thinking of, we should probably know about it. So we'll have this opportunity just to gather all that input from y'all today. And you can use the QR code to head into that Padlet or click on the link that Josh will be sharing in the chat momentarily. Josh is also going to drop in the chat for your reference item 12, which contains all the revised, the proposed rule that we're referring to in the policy update today. So feel free to have that open and at hand if it is helpful to you. And I know Petra did share that in the pre-work. And with that, y'all, we are going to head into the prep requirements component of our updates today. And I believe I am turning it over to Kyla first.
Awesome. Thanks, Melissa. Good morning, everyone. It's so wonderful seeing you all this morning and really appreciate you all for being here. And I would just echo what Melissa said. Your feedback has been so critical for this work, and just really want to say thank you to you all and just grateful for the continued feedback. So we can go ahead and go to the next slide. And I'd like to just share a brief summary of the proposal from February related to mentor educator requirements. And so the first topic that we covered was just related to governance. And the summary of the proposal is that EPPs offer prep traditional and pre-service alt-cert meet a minimum of 2 times per academic year. And it included in the proposal what those governance meetings should entail, which include the ongoing support for mentoring educators discussion. We also talked about the mentor qualification responsibilities for intern mentor teachers. There were some updates there to align with TEC 21458. And then the biggest update was related to the mentor training, and that the Texas mentorship training is the required training for mentoring educators for those prep funded routes to align with Commissioner of Ed rule. And so on this next slide, want to just share sort of the implementation timeline. And so you can see in this first blue box on the left-hand side that the first year that this is required for the prep funded routes is in the 27-28 school year, and that this Texas mentorship training is required on a 3-year cycle. And so the next time that those initial mentoring educators would need to be trained would be for the 2030-31 school year, and that refresher training will be significantly shorter than that initial training. And then this graphic just also shows that any new mentoring educators that aren't trained in year 1 would need to be trained in those out years. And so on the next slide, I'll talk through sort of the areas that have been identified based on stakeholder feedback for considerations and actions that we're planning to take, and would love if you all could document on the Padlet if these implementation supports address the needs that you all have been communicating, that the field's communicating, and if there's any other considerations you all have for us. So the first area of feedback that we received was just clarity on like the funding mechanisms for the Texas mentorship training. We shared a while back the cost, and then we've had some initial webinars of how LEAs can use prep funding, their success-based funding to cover those TMT training costs, and we'll continue to provide guidance docs, webinars, and examples to clarify those funding questions. We've also heard some concern regarding training length and just the need to streamline training hours to avoid duplication. And so based on feedback we heard from many of you all on this call, we are working to establish some training tracks for the 27-28 school year based on criteria. As those are more developed, we'll bring them for stakeholder input to reduce those time requirements for mentoring educators. I also named on the previous slide that refresher training will be significantly shorter than the initial 24-hour training. We've also received from the field a lot of interest in offering TMT, as well as heard from testimony, just making sure there are enough providers to meet the demand. And so we are currently training our current cohort of providers that are all regionally based to ensure there's enough providers in each region, and are exploring opening the application process for the coming school year for additional providers. And then we'll just continue to update the website with responses to stakeholder questions, and we'll continue to convene stakeholder feedback groups based on needs that you'll communicate. So I'll go ahead and pause here and would love to hear, you can drop your comments on the Padlet. Do these implementation supports address the needs? And then is there anything else we should consider for implementation supports? All right. Well, I'll go ahead and pass it over to, I believe, William.
Yes. So I have the opportunity to discuss the proposal updates that were made back in February to the pre-service alternative rules for the pre-service alternative certification route. As you all know, the pre-service alternative route is a route where candidates spend significant pre-service practice time in the classroom before beginning an internship through an alternative certification program. While the basic structures remain the same, sort of the theme of February were small tweaks based on feedback from you all that really helped to refine some of those structures and provide flexibility where it was needed. So those major updates are listed here. A move for the in the lead teaching requirements from 10 to 15 hours. Some addition to ensure that candidates got sufficient at-bats with delivering and lead teaching lessons, individual lessons. There were some updates for flexibility, and that included some feedback, implementation of pretty resounding feedback that the 50 field-based experience hours could be covered in that 120 hours of pre-internship. So exempting the candidates from those 50 hours. And then additionally offering some flexibility with the pre-internship placement, naming explicitly that could occur at a different district with transition supports and could occur in a classroom. The pre-internship could occur in a classroom that was different from the candidate certification area. So, for example, if they were seeking 4 through 8 social studies certification, but there was no classroom available for that pre-internship, being in the closest possible. So maybe a middle school ELA room, and then a transition support plan to begin teaching in that content area in their internship. The rules also connect back to the pre-service competencies, which many of you all are likely very familiar with in 228.41. Those competencies that need to be shown before beginning a clinical experience. In this case, the candidate will get to show progress and should show progress towards proficiency in those competencies. And those competencies had some adjustments to align to the new Chapter 235 standards. So as far as implementation supports, we know this is a new pathway. So TEA is currently piloting and working to implement a transformation service. So developing that service in 26-27 to support programs who are going to begin implementing the route in 27-28 and beyond. So stay tuned for updates on that technical assistance service. We also understand that alt-cert programs that are considering this transformation are very aware that they will need to implement the new content and are likely needing not just guidance on that new content, but also on how that fits into those first 150 hours that must occur before the internship and what can occur specifically with those reading and math academies during the internship. And so we are aware of that. And as you all know, EPPs are going to receive training and technical assistance to implement those training content requirements. And all programs will, of course, receive that guidance specific to the requirements for the first 150 hours. So on the Padlet, happy to get feedback on these implementation supports and also happy to get areas where questions may still be lingering, where the field may need greater clarity, knowing that as a new route with a number of moving parts, two clinical experiences, a pre-internship and an internship, there may just be areas where we need to be aware that questions are arising or confusion is arising. So feel free to leave that feedback in the Padlet along with any feedback on implementation supports. So as Melissa said, Padlet, feel free to come off mute if you've got burning questions, and we'll give you all some time.
One thing I would just kind of like pitch to the group as folks are documenting some feedback. If anyone is, already beginning the process of planning for a pre-service alternative pathway, maybe starting to have some early conversations with district partners or starting to think through certain models for pre-service alternative. Again, the goal here for this to be flexible and to have some innovative approaches. It's always helpful. We're curious to know what folks are planning. So if you are thinking through a potential design option, if you want to, we're happy to be thought partners, or also would just love to learn from you all as you do some early piloting or exploring. So again, just kind of, would love to be kept in the loop on that just so that we can learn too.
Thanks for that plug, Jessica.
Seeing a couple great questions dropped in the Padlet. Feel free to continue, and I can hand it over to the next person if there's, which I think is, I am not sure. Possibly it's,
I think it's me.
yes.
Can we, there's
Sure.
two quick questions in the pre-service alt one that I think might just be helpful just to
Perfect.
address really quickly. Donna, so it asks if there's sub hours or hiring on an emergency permit can be counted as the 120 hours. And so that would be no, it needs to be in a structured clinical teaching setting under a cooperating teacher. And the other question was, do the 120 hours have to occur after admission? And the answer there is yes. They are the structured clinical teaching. Thanks.
These are great questions for us to add to our forthcoming FAQ and updates too. Appreciate those. Awesome, y'all. Will feel free to continue to leave those questions, comments. They're tremendously helpful for us as we roll out communication. And I will take us into the next section, which is pertaining to training content. And Beth Burkhardt will be joining me here. She's the expert. But I'll kick us off briefly just with a recap of where we've been. And then Beth's going to chat with y'all a little bit about the implementation supports. So we've been talking about content since July, and I know it's evolved over time. So I did first want to just recap and anchor us in what is happening in the 26-27 school year with training content. So in the 26-27 school year, we are implementing the statutory requirement that all EC3 and EC6 candidates who are in those prep routes are trained in the reading and math academies. And what that means is, in terms of the design process, we are developing an EPP Texas Reading Academies and an EPP Math Achievement Academies. And those will include the Reading Academies and Math Academies based content, but with a focus on additional candidate supports. And we have embedded the HQIM implementation skills development for candidates, as well as they'll be framed and founded in the science of learning with an intro course for science of learning embedded, and then the science of learning will be embedded throughout the modules. And I'm not going to stand here and give you all like the deep dive into the courses. Beth will be doing that shortly with her team, but really the idea here is that we're capitalizing on this opportunity to build this comprehensive course structure that includes these best practice components and is tailored to meet candidates' needs without compromising the content development for candidates' skills that's currently in the reading and math academies. The other piece I'll name here is that we have the science of learning carved out here as the third course for other certification areas. And in the proposed rules, that is the third content area, and it is required for all certification areas. So EC3 and EC6, reading and math academies, and then the science of learning for other certification areas. So those are the three content areas for candidates. I'm going to talk a little bit about implementation of of this in a second as I go into the next slide. So going back to what we shared with the SBEC in February, we really took the opportunity to talk to the board around the feedback we had received from stakeholders regarding implementation of the training content requirements. And like what it boils down to is that, excuse me, y'all, lost my train of thought there. What it boils down to is that stakeholders communicated this is a lot to implement very quickly ahead of the 27-28 school year, and still communicated with us, but we still see the critical need for implementation the 27-28 school year so that candidates may be served in these prep routes. So we're trying to strike that balance of how do we launch the 27-28 full suite of prep routes for traditional, pre-service alt cert, and continue the residency implementation while supporting programs to fully integrate and implement the training content in a meaningful manner that's going to be most effective. So here are the things that we adapted from early iterations of timelines, et cetera, just to recap for y'all here. When it comes to training content requirements, we actually looked at our previous timelines and we said, we're going to extend the runway to train faculty and leadership to do that work to integrate the training content. So we previously had compressed it all into like a couple of months, and now we have extended it up until the summer of 27. And Beth will take a look at that in a second, to give that longer runway so that faculty can move fluidly through those course training modules and seek that certification that's necessary. I also want to reiterate during that time, leadership teams will be able to receive technical assistance to support the integration of that training content into their coursework, and they'll have more time to do so. The other piece that we also updated the SBEC around is the idea that there should be a prioritization to the approach to content implementation in 27-28. So while the new routes that have not previously existed, and those are the prep traditional and pre-service alt cert, will have to implement that training content for candidates who are in those new routes, right? So any candidate in that new route needs to be prepared with that training content. Residency routes that are currently implementing those routes and currently engaging in prep partnership programs in the 26-27 school year would have time to engage in beginning implementation of the training content with their candidates and also receive that aligned technical assistance. You can see the citation here back to the board book 228.57F, page 34-35 for your reference as well. So in a nutshell, basically it allows for programs to think about and clarifies that programs should think about how much they're implementing and how soon in that 27-28 school year. There's an initial implementation across all prep programs who are offering those routes, but residencies will have that flexibility to think about at what scale they're doing that in 27-28 ahead of the 28-29 full implementation. And then the third case here, which we'll get to when we take a look at prep route approval policy updates, we also just extended the review and approval runway for 27-28 and 28-29. It was really impossible the way we had proposed it. So it is a good thing that stakeholders gave us that feedback. And I'll share those dates in a moment, but essentially programs will have until July of 27 to be approved for the 27-28 school year and July of 28 to be approved for the 28-29 school year. And I will pause there to hand it over to Beth to just take us through some of the implementation considerations and timelines regarding the training content, like the next level of information.
Thanks, Melissa. Good morning, everybody. So this one slide that I'm presenting is not my deep dive on the training content. but really just grounding us in some of the broad strokes and the big phases of this content implementation. So as you can see right now and beginning back in 2025, we've been hard at work developing this content. In the case of Reading and Math Academies, that's really adapting the content so it's right for teacher candidates, providing those more practice-based opportunities for candidates, and just making sure that it does fit the needs of programs and candidates. Currently, it's designed for district implementation. We are also at the same time working on training materials and training for EPP faculty and EPP leadership. You're going to see the first iteration of that around December, where we will provide onboarding for EPP leadership. So be on the lookout for more announcements regarding that onboarding. Coming up then, starting in December with that onboarding, and then going into the late spring of 2027, we will be training EPP leadership and EPP faculty on the content academies, so math academies, reading academies that integrate science of learning and HQIM skills. Once everybody's all trained in that first iteration, August 2027, we can begin the coursework implementation for teacher candidates. I also want to drop back to that training and alignment. That is also the time for EPPs to be looking at their coursework and planning for where content academies are going to fit within your course scope and sequence. Going back to 2027 and beyond, this is where the coursework gets implemented with teacher candidates, alongside with that TEA provided implementation support. At this point, you are probably all wondering in programs, what should I be doing now to get ready for this? We will begin our communications along those lines of like the most important things that you all can do to prepare for implementation, to prepare for the content academies. We're going to begin that communication next month. This will include the deep dive webinars. This will include one-pagers coming out to you and more communication in this meeting. So please be on the lookout for that. It will be coming soon. This is all I get with you. I am going to actually pass it back to Melissa for the remaining for the SBEC implementation part of this. So thanks. Nice to see everyone.
Thanks, Beth. And then I would encourage, we were like, how do we frame this question? Because we know there's a lot of questions about the training content and, you all are thinking about things. So do not hesitate. You may still leave us those comments, leave us those questions, those considerations that you're thinking about in that column on the Padlet as well. Because those will likely, again, inform frequently asked questions we raised during the webinars, et cetera. So please give us what your thoughts and considerations are at this point in time. And then I don't have the Padlet. I have like a 2-screen problem over here projecting, but if y'all see anything on there, Jess and team, just flag it too so we can address it. I'll go ahead though, as y'all are leaving some of those notes, comments, and I'll just talk about the connected piece around route review and approval, which is super exciting to offer these updated routes. Or these new routes, excuse me. So back in February, we also talked to the SBEC about their requirements for prep routes and their 2-pronged process for that approval in the onset of the prep allotment. Prior to the February meeting, we did not yet have the approval figures that clearly list out the evidence and criteria that programs will demonstrate to attain approval. One thing we framed for the board was that the process would mirror the current residency approval process in which programs submit an application, the agency reviews that for the requirements in those figures, right? And then would recommend the program for that approval. So we'll mirror that process. So we talked to the SBEC about that. So I'll just walk us through, and what I have highlighted here are some key components from those figures that really pertain to new requirements and those content requirements. So for the approval for the 27-28 school year, as I noted previously, the SBEC would approve programs in July of 2020 by July of 2027. And that in turn qualifies that EPP to partner for that 27-28 school year, because those figures are a little bit different than what's in 28-29. For your reference, the pages are listed here on this slide for the board book if you'd like to go back. But a couple things I would just name here for y'all. Basically, it prioritizes for all three of those routes: residency, pre-service alt, and trad, that they would have to show evidence that the faculty and staff had completed the training requirements and that related training certification for the training content. So there'd be evidence of that in that approval process. All who are applying have to submit a plan to demonstrate how they'll be implementing the training content. We are not at this time asking for a fully reimagined degree plan and scope and sequence and syllabi for courses, because we know that takes time, and that is one of those big pieces of feedback that we received. But what we are asking for in this first approval is for the plan. And then for those new routes, we also named for the board that we would want to see evidence of their plans related to shared governance. And then there's other readiness criteria listed in the narrative. For example, with the pre-service alt route, as William named, the approach to that pre-internship clinical experience that is required. Moving on to, not on that far. Moving on to 28-29, that approval would occur in July of 2028. And the thing I would remind folks here too is that all programs, even if they were approved for 27-28, would need to reapply because it is a different set of criteria they'd be approved for. At this point in time, all programs will be reviewed for that the prep training content has been integrated into their coursework. So evidence of course syllabi, et cetera. And then once approved, that annual approval would not continue year over year. One important thing I'll note here, when you look at the figures for programs that were previously residency approved, you will see caveats around the amount of things that would have to be submitted in each of these approval cycles. And truly for those previously approved residency programs, because I know we have folks on this call, they're really showing primarily evidence of the content integration. So what we've tried to do here is create multiple pathways to approval so that people are not redundantly reapplying for things that they've already been approved for. I did want to name that again for y'all, and that will definitely go in the FAQs. When it comes to full approval, nothing had changed from the previously proposed approach shared with the SBEC, where the full approval would occur within the context of the redesigned CARS quality review, where we would have the opportunity not just to review for compliance, but for quality of implementation. And then, of course, the opportunity for discretionary review of programs still exists in rule. There was one update we provided regarding initial and ongoing eligibility for programs to continue to participate in the prep routes. And that was this piece highlighted here in orange at the bottom. You can see that EPPs must not be rated accredited warned or probation for 3 consecutive ASEP reporting cycles to retain that eligibility. And we did that to make sure that it was consistent with what we have currently in TAC Chapter 229. So that was really just a cleanup for aligned rule. When it comes to implementation considerations, more to come shortly, but we'll be starting with launch of communication and application materials from fall to winter of 27, with a tentative March 2027 launch of the application as programs just start to engage with the application and include things other than the content training certification that they'll need to share for that approval. And then finally, that final SBEC approval would occur in July of 2027. So we wanted to just share those big benchmark dates for y'all to keep in mind as you're starting to consider this next phase. And I'll pause here. We have this core question once again, but please take time in the Padlet. We'll be checking that to see if there's any questions that we could answer potentially in this moment. Otherwise, we'll be taking those back to our materials.
Melissa, there's one question in the Padlet from Kelsey around
Great.
The development of the content and kind of the SBEC's oversight. I think because that was included in the proposal item. I don't know if you want to like voice over what that structure
absolutely.
looks like.
Great question, Kelsey. So in terms of what is in the proposal right now, the SBEC will have to approve and make sure that content does meet those statutory requirements that we have listed. So it's like research-based, alignment to educator standards, evidence of, practice-based preparation of candidates. We can pull those up and just like put them in the chat too, so you can see those bullet points. But basically they will put their final approval on that content, making sure that it does meet those requirements before it is approved for use.
Kelsey, additional, does that answer your question or other things that you were thinking of there?
I mean, approval is not the same thing as input, and so that's kind of where I'm getting at. I get that the agency is going to develop all these things with all of those criteria in mind, but is the SBEC going to have any sort of input opportunity, or is this just going to be an up or down vote by them? Is kind of what I'm getting at. Oh, I apologize. I didn't have my mic close to me. Apologies. I'm going to repeat myself. Approval is not the same thing as input. And even though the agency is going to be developing all these trainings with this criteria in mind, will the SBEC actually get input into what the training looks like, or is this just going to be an up or down vote?
Mm-hmm. The board will have an opportunity to review the materials and then, take action accordingly. And I think, we also will be planning for standing updates for the board on development of the content. I would say there are, I think that's in particular the content that is sort of like the commissioner developed content. The Reading and Math Academies, those are a statutory requirement. Those are pretty explicitly required, but I think, but those will also still go to the SBEC for their review and approval.
Yeah. Great.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Kelsey.
appreciate it. And we do plan on having opportunities for stakeholder input as we go through iterative development too. Kelsey, I know that was also part of your other question, similar to how we've had stakeholders engaged as we've developed the Texas mentorship training, et cetera. So we anticipate having stakeholder structures too.
Communication on that shortly too as well.
Wonderful. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thanks, y'all. All right. With that, I'll just take us forward. Continue to leave those comments, y'all. And then we have here, always helpful, just a map of, going back to these 4 big buckets that we've talked through today. Here's just what y'all can anticipate in terms of launch and timeline. And then I'll name here when it says something is starting and there's no date, it's because it's likely the first of that year that it is happening. So when it's a policy piece. So I'll give you all a second just to scan this overarching map.
And Melissa, there's a note in the Padlet from Katie that just named, thinking about the timeline for SBEC approval in July of 2027, worrying about making all these changes and then potentially finding out right before the start of that academic year that someone you may not be approved. And so I'm going to voice over a little bit how we're thinking about this staged application process.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and Katie, your question going to like if I'm not approved in July of 27 for the 27-28 school year, what is going to happen to my district partner and my candidates, et cetera, right?
That is part of it, Melissa. It's also part of like, I know this is something that our faculty will ask when
Yep.
I'm like, here's all the things we have to do. And they're like,
Yep.
well, what if we don't get approved? And I'm like, that's
Yep.
really going to
Okay.
suck because we've already done all of the work.
So two things.
So, yeah.
Yeah, totally. So if there were a world where you didn't get approved in 2027 for the 2020 in July of 27 for the 27-28 school year, that would not mean that that program could reapply for the 28-29 school year. So I wanted to just name that out loud. Like you're not like off or done. But when it comes to like the immediate needs of district partners, this is something we are actively thinking through around upfront communication with district partners around like what does happen if a program does not meet those approval requirements by July of 2027. The other thing I'll note, the application process will start well before the July 27 approval date, right? So programs will have time to work through those. Hopefully that helps with like building like a strong response to application with that final approval really being like TEA notification of like, hey, like UT completed their training. So I hope that's a little bit helpful and reassuring, but we are actively thinking about the communication for programs and for districts about what this might mean if you know, if there were that case in that scenario and like how districts should consider partnership opportunities.
Yeah, I would just name like the application for 27-28 is primarily attestation based. Like, yes, we will implement this content.
Plan.
So I think probably like the biggest factor in 27-28 approval would be if you had the faculty trained and certified, and that you would kind of like know progressively throughout the 26-27 academic year as they were going through that training. So you would know that earlier in the process.
Exactly. So that extended runway really does help with like reducing the risk, I think, Katie, of not being approved. Good question. Just anything else you're seeing that can be addressed?
Not at the moment. I think there are some questions in the chat that are like more detailed, but I think we can also monitor this and prepare those responses for FAQ follow-ups too.
Wonderful. That's exactly what we need. Okay. All right, y'all. Well, we'll move along and we're going to head into the additional HB2 requirement updates. And I believe we are beginning here with Lori.
Yep. Good morning, everybody. Happy Friday. It's good to see everybody. And we appreciate your continued support as we work through these updates in these critical chapters, especially this one. And so just as a reminder, we had some updates that came out of House Bill 2 that weren't related to prep work. And so we were addressing those updates as well in Chapter 228. So I wanted to just highlight a few of the critical areas, especially areas we've had some questions about. And then ask you if you have any additional input for us as we move forward with training and providing information to EPP so that they can implement these updates. So the first one is, as we all recall, the intern certificate. The House Bill 2 required that we create a 2-year intern certificate. And so the decision was made to just go away from the 1 year and go to the 2-year for anyone who needed an intern certificate, whether it was a teacher candidate or a candidate in a non-teacher program, such as principal, who might need an intern certificate for employment as they were getting certified in that area. So we're moving to the 2-year certificate, which is referenced in 228, but it's also in 230 in the certificate rules. And so then we had some conversation and made some decisions around what the full school year internship will look like within the guardrails of now a 2-year intern certificate instead of a 1-year. And so the decision, with your input and the input of a lot of stakeholders that aren't on this call particularly, was that we wanted to stay with the 1 full school year internship. And so the mechanics of that happening are going to be are things that programs have asked us about. And so we are going to still be evaluating programs for ACEP purposes on what's happening in the 1 full school year at the end of that full year, as we are now. And so additionally, around the 1 full school year internship, we also did some work on the language about extensions and additional internships. And we further delineated what would be an extension year, where someone had completed a successful internship, but maybe had to stay on that intern certificate for a little bit longer while they finished up other requirements, passed a test or whatever they needed to do to maintain their employment and until they qualified for certification with a standard. And then we differentiated that from an additional internship, which someone would have to complete if they were unsuccessful in their first internship for whatever reason and needed to complete an additional internship to meet the clinical experience requirement. And so then additionally, a flexibility that was built in, that is in the proposal item, is that we removed the formal observation requirement for candidates who had had a successful internship and were extended for other reasons, such as, I've been successful, I just need to finish a class before I can graduate and get my standard, or whatever they need to do. And then the field supervision flexibility was built in because in House Bill 2, there was a requirement to add flexibility in for the alternative certification route. So the flexibility included updating the formal and informal observation requirements to reduce those for candidates, interns who were not late hires. And so the reduction went from 5 observations to 4, 2 per semester, and then from 6 informals to 4, 2 per semester. And that's the item that went to proposal. And then finally, one of the key update areas around late hires was that for those of you who weren't at the SBEC, you need to know that the item was amended by the SBEC at proposal. And based on stakeholder input, the underlined phrase that you see on the screen that says and requires additional time to complete the pre-internship requirements was added to the definition of late hire based on stakeholder input. And basically what that means is that if I have an individual who meets the late hire definition in that they were admitted to the EPP and hired by the district within that late hire parameter, I don't need to call them a late hire necessarily if they've been able to complete all of the pre-service requirements before beginning their internship. So adding this to the definition means that you wouldn't necessarily need to identify a person in their clinical experience record as a late hire if they had already completed everything they needed to complete to in terms of their pre-internship requirements to be in the classroom on the intern certificate. So those were the key updates. There were a few others, such as some terminology updates and some route tweaks that happened because of the new routes that were defined. These were some of the key updates and ones that had generated a lot of discussion. So on the next slide, we have gotten questions about what the observation schedule is going to look like for the 26-27 reporting year. If these go into effect at the beginning of September 26, what's the observation schedule going to look like? What requirements are programs going to be held accountable for in terms of observations? And so we are going to bring out some guidance and some training on the observation schedule so everybody's clear about what that looks like. The observation flexibilities that were built in make those requirements more lenient. So if the good news is if you're meeting the current requirements, then you'll definitely meet the more flexible, lenient requirements going forward. So we are planning some webinars to deliver that information to programs, as well as EPPs have expressed the same concerns that we've expressed internally about a 2-year intern certificate that may be deactivated after the first year, and then needs to be reactivated if the candidate needs a second year. And where this is particularly problematic now is that an intern certificate that's been recommended by EPPA currently can't be reactivated by EPPB. And so we're having to build some systems in place so that the intern certificate essentially is owned by the candidate. And so if EPPA recommends it and then deactivates it, if there's time left on it and the candidate moves to a new EPP, then EPPB should be able to reactivate that intern certificate to use for that candidate that's in your program. Mm-hmm. And actually, we are building a portal for deactivation, reactivation in ECOS. It's not going to be completed before 9/1, but that ultimately will be used for this purpose. And for now, we're going to be handling that on an as requested basis for candidates who move from EPP to EPP and need that 2-year certificate to be deactivated and reactivated. So we'll provide you more information on how we're going to handle that as well. Hopefully those are few and far between. And then there are other changes that have gone in, such as terminology changes and things like that. And so programs have been asking us, hey, are y'all going to come out with some guidance to kind of focus us on what the changes are, or do we have to comb through all of this tack and figure it out ourselves? And so the plan is for us to provide some overviews on some of the changes that have happened. And so on the Padlet, there is space for you to record anything that you think the field would need to be trained on, or any topics that are being implemented that you think we need to include in this training that we might have not thought about. Please go ahead and include those there. And when we're building this training for you, we will try to make sure we include all of those topics. And so we'll just pause here for that.
Lori, question, and I could be misremembering. In SBEC meeting in February, there was a request from stakeholder feedback. It wasn't me, but just from what I remember, that SBEC go back to the 3 and 3 formal observations versus the 2 and 2. So I know that 2 and 2 was proposed. Is that still going to continue, or is it 3 and 3?
Or for the informals, is that what you?
No, the formal observations.
So the formals was previously 5
yes.
for interns.
Yes.
What was voted on a proposal did shift to 4 total formal observations.
Yes, and you're right. I said that number incorrectly, but I meant 5, and then it was in proposal for 4, but stakeholder feedback was asking that it return to 5.
So the board did not make that change at proposal. Okay. It remains 4.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, but it stays 5, just to be clear, with the late hires who have entered the classroom without pre-service training. The observation schedule will not change for them. So that will be still 5. And then the probationary certificate, should someone need a 3rd-year internship, that probationary certificate will still require 5 as well. So the only reductions were done just with the standard, internship, not late hire, not probationary.
I got it this time. A lot of details to remember, but hearing you clarify that for me is very helpful. Thank you, ladies.
And and that's exactly why we need to roll out some training for the field, because I'm sure other folks are confused too. And everyone wants to make sure they get the supervision in that they're required to get, especially the formals, because those have a larger potential impact on your program if they're not completed correctly. I get that. So yeah,
Yes,
we're gonna
ma'am.
be
Thank you
coming
for the
out with some of that.
clarification.
Okay.
All righty. I think with that, we can move on to the last little bit that we wanted to highlight today, and I'll turn it over to Kyla.
Awesome. Thanks, Melissa. I just wanted to highlight the proposal for the field supervisor training. You can see on the slide the existing policy, and then what is in orange. The proposal extends the implementation timeline of the existing field supervisor training requirements. So you can see the September 1, 2027 pushed back by a year. And then you can see in the next orange highlight area, sort of the staggered approach. And then this last sort of section of text was updated from December to February based on stakeholder feedback. And so in the sort of original discussion item in December, this stated that TTUS would not count towards the field supervisor training, and that was updated to include that valid T-test certification and other approved aligned trainings on observation and coaching would count as a portion of the field supervisor training. And again, that was informed by stakeholder feedback. And then on the next slide, just want to talk a little bit about the implementation supports and considerations. And so based on, the feedback we've heard, concerns with cost, we've heard interest to TOT, and we've heard just wanting more information regarding training logistics, location, frequency, format, length. And so related to the cost, we are still, as we've shared in the past couple of meetings, exploring options to keep the training as cost effective as possible and close to current estimated costs. We also would just note that there are options to utilize success-based funding. As far as questions related to training logistics, location, we do have all 20 ESCs do have staff members that will be able to offer this training. We are establishing some criteria to support regions that may need virtual training options. As the update in the policy reflected, based on previous attendance to other trainings such as LIFT or T-tests that are focused on observation and feedback, that would count towards a large portion of the field supervisor training. And then we do intend to host some implementation webinars later in spring and summer. We've also heard the interest, particularly from EPPs wanting to be able to offer the training. And with stakeholder feedback groups, we'll develop some readiness criteria around that training offering. And so with that, would pause and would love feedback captured in the Padlet. All right, I'll turn it back over to Melissa.
Thanks, Kyla. Couple things to round us out here, and feel free to, of course, keep leaving that input in the Padlet. But we did also compile a composite of the other HB2 requirements, overall implementation, and a timeline. I'll name here today, we talked about the field supervisor training and its begin date, which Kyla just updated us on, and also the requirements for alternative certification that Lori updated us on. We did not talk about asynchronous coursework requirements or requirements for compliance with coursework prohibitions according to state law. And those are still things we will be rolling out communication about, right? So I just wanted to name those pieces here that we have laid into this table, and that the begin date of those attestations for evidence and compliance with state law as well. And then the last piece I would note here too, which Lori very importantly reminded me we should include this in this table, that legacy candidates being prepared under legacy 228 rules will need to complete that preparation by 8/31/26 as it will terminate. And Lori, I don't know if you have any other additional quick hits there, but Lori will be sharing some information in the newsletter as a reminder as well.
Yeah, no, I think everyone is well aware of what the timing is. I just thought it was important to put it back in front of everybody because we have so many new timelines and dates for all this new stuff coming down that it's easy to forget the old stuff. So
absolutely,
ending with the legacy is going away effective 8/31. You're going to see some changes in ECOS as we remove some of those old like clinical experience types, like the 14 weeks clinical teaching. So we're going to be tidying that up a little bit, but we're going to put some stuff in the newsletter to remind folks across the state. So
thanks, Lori. All right, y'all. With that, last piece here, we've been foreshadowing that communication is coming. We promise it's coming starting today. But when it comes to broad communications around EPP requirements for HB2, we will be embedding an HB2 implementation corner into our newsletter to provide regular updates. We will also be launching an implementation webinar series, as Lori was noting. It'll have an array of topics, right, related to implementation of these requirements. And then we will also have opportunities for office hours pending. So coming shortly, support is on its way. And then I also wanted to name, and we'll look at this momentarily in the prep updates section, we're going to do our best also to cross-pollinate any communication that needs to be pulled from the prep program partnership lines of communication into our current ed prep structures, for example. So we'll work earnestly to make sure that we are aligning communication channels so that people are getting information in the most efficient and effective way possible is the best way I can put it. But I did want to name here, we've got a slate of prep related supports out there in the field as well, which we'll take a peek at in the next section. And with that, I'll just roll us into some of those prep updates. This is an update section, y'all. But please, if you have questions, feel free to share those as well. As a reminder, our prep allotment program has 5 key components: our recruitment, pre-service preparation, and mentorship. And within that pre-service preparation, we've been talking a lot about that today. It includes those 3 key programs with the prep trad and PALT beginning in 27-28, as we just discussed. A couple things I would just name for y'all here. When it comes to prep resources, we have I think this is an animated slide, so I'm going to animate it. There is a new prep landing page, and we can share out that link in the chat in a moment. But I wanted to just walk through for y'all here. It includes an overview section. It's got links to news and previous FAQs. So like if there's office hours on the horizon, there will be notification of it. So it'll be a standing hub of information. And then it'll include a bank of resources that have been recent and an opportunity to submit questions. Exciting things on the resource front. We're going to highlight written partnership agreements in a moment, but a district prep allotment funding calculation estimation resource is coming shortly, as well as the prep program allotment guidebook. So those are 2 really critical tools that are coming to the field shortly. And I can actually click into the page, but I'll have Jessica or Josh share that in the chat for y'all.
I dropped in there.
Thank you. Appreciate you. And then when it comes to upcoming timelines, we are somehow in the month of March. I just noted that we've got some really critical resources coming down the line, especially that calculator in the guidebook, which will provide you an overview of guidance, key business rules, et cetera, as a grounding document. We've also are teeing up for communication support around verification of participation in the PrEP program, which will come in May upon the effective date of those Commissioner of Education rules, which I'll recap briefly in a second as well. Another thing that we want folks to be on the lookout for shortly for communication will be communication regarding, Lori had mentioned, brought up the topic of ECOS earlier. We will have guidance to districts and EPPs around ECOS for PrEP coming down the line shortly as well in that slate of communication. And with that, I'm going to have Josh just provide a brief overview of some resources coming down the line for PrEP residency and GYO.
All right. Thanks, Melissa. I appreciate it. Yeah, it's good to speak with you guys today. Just in terms of the written partnership agreement, we've got resources that we're in the very final steps of final approval to get those out to you. And so hopefully in the next few days, we'll have those published and ready to go. But just as you're thinking about those agreements, we really want the partnerships to be thinking about some very key aspects and some actions and accountabilities that, one, are required in statute in the Texas Administrative Code. Make sure that those are included in your MOUs. And so that's going to be a huge piece of it, is just ensuring that the statutory requirements are specifically identified and mentioned there in the MOUs. And so along with that, there'll be signatures required from both the district as well as from the EPP or IHE, from their legal authority. And so we just want to make sure, again, that everyone is aware of what are the important key aspects that are going to be statutorily required, as well as what are the things that are important to you as each of the entities that are coming into this partnership together. The partnership form is going to be uploaded as part of the verification of participation form that'll be coming out very soon as well. And so, as you're working on that together, you'll have opportunity to get those completed, and then those will be submitted by the school systems as we're moving forward. We do have office hours coming up. Our first one is going to be in just a little, very short time for questions regarding these written partnership agreements. And so you can see those times that are there. They're also listed on the PrEP website that was put it in the chat a little bit earlier, as well as in the EPP newsletter that's been going out, and the PrEP newsletter that will be coming out very soon as well. So we're here to support you as best we can. And so please feel free to attend those office hours. So, we can help you however is necessary. Any questions?
One thing just to plug here that as Josh and I were developing guidance and examples of MOUs, we're doing that for both the MOU or the partnership agreement that's required for the Grow Your Own partnership work, and another one for the residency partnership work. So knowing that folks may have interest in one and or both of those programs, there'll be examples for both.
Thanks, y'all. And then the last piece here for PrEP updates, just wanted to situate y'all again in the proposed Commissioner of Education rule, which is Chapter 153, Subchapter FF. As I think we've shared before, we've got these key core sections that we just wrapped gathering public comment on and are currently finalizing responses to. So these set support us to implement those statutory requirements for our state. And we are, again, want to thank and are grateful to many folks on this call who also submitted comment there, helping us to think through any further refinements to those rules. And then just a note on Commissioner of Rules or Commissioner of Education rules. Again, we're in that final stretch of response to public comments, and the intended rule effective date is May 10th, but those dates can be a little bit fluid sometimes. So we'll keep you all posted on those actual effective dates. And then reinforcing here those key communication channels. One thing I didn't mention when I was talking about the webpage, which includes that portal, and then we also talked about the office hours and webinars. The prep newsletter is launching, which is really exciting. So there'll be a regular cadence of information coming that will also link you back to updates that exist on that webpage, et cetera. So doing everything we can to streamline communication across our existing communication structures as well. And
so there was a
yeah.
question in the Padlet around when are those written partnership agreements due?
Perfect. Those will be due to they'll be included in your upload for the verification of participation. So that will be in May. Great question.
By the end of May, right?
End of May, yes.
Okay.
Yes. Thanks, Jess. Fantastic. All right, we'll keep adding questions and comments, and then I will turn it over to Jeremy for our next section of updates.
Good morning, everyone. I'm excited to be here and share about the EPP Data Working Group meeting we had last month. Go ahead for the next slide here. Or can I move it? No. Thank you. Just a reminder, the EPP Data Stakeholder Work Group is for folks who are interested in and oriented to EPP data and ASAP calculations. We meet typically 1 or sometimes 2 times a year, depending on need. Anyone in this group is invited to participate, and we met on Wednesday, February 18th. Next slide. To share some discussion or some notes on what we discussed in this meeting. So we item by item, we discussed some possible processes for when there are redesign tests or new certificates that happen and how to determine accountability in ASAP. We received feedback from the group that general guidance is useful to understand better when there will be continuation of counting versus a brand new count that starts from test to test. And we are in process of discussing possibilities for the April 229 discussion item. For request for exception, we discussed that we made updates to the Excel file for this process, and we received positive feedback from the group about this process improvement. We also asked if there were any changes necessary, and folks in the group let us know that they'd like us to continue working to be transparent in the process, and we're going to continue working on that at the end of the 2025-2026 reporting cycle when RFEs will occur. We talked about student growth and implementing the student growth indicator for the first time this year, and asked about how the roster process went. We got some good feedback and some suggestions for how we might tweak that roster to help EPPs better review it, and we continue seeking feedback from folks as everyone is moving forward with using that data. For teacher and principal survey refresh, we discussed the T-test refresh and how this is going to prompt a revision of the principal and teacher survey. We asked for and received some guidance on a preferred implementation approach for that, knowing that we're going to be designing a new survey, and that will be incorporated into the 229 discussion item in April, so that we have a codified process. And then last, we talked about ECOS prep pre-service updates specifically, and gave some insight into some tentative timeframes for data entry in ECOS that's related to the prep pre-service program. Folks indicated that they are looking for more feedback on communications and trainings, and I think The prep allotment teams will continue, as Melissa showed earlier, updating the website and adding information as it becomes available. And plan next steps, as I mentioned a couple of times, we're looking to integrate feedback into Chapter 229 discussion item updates in April, as well as I noted, there are some places where we're going to continue working on our processes. And we will follow up if needed after the April meeting with the group, if that's something that's necessary. And that's all I got there.
Thanks, Jeremy. So to round us out today, just a preview of upcoming items that currently slated to go before the SBOE at their April meeting. And then as we're working to finalize the agenda with the board chair, some early item planning for the April SBEC meeting. So for the SBOE meeting that is occurring mid-April, there will be no rule items, just given the rulemaking cadence. The SBEC didn't adopt anything at their February meeting, so there'll be nothing that goes to the SBOE for review and consideration in April. But I do provide a standing update to the SBOE at each meeting, ensuring they have a line of sight on actions and decisions the SBEC is currently engaged with. And so we'll be giving them an update on the February meeting at that time. Again, as we work to finalize the April agenda with the board chair, there are a few items we know for certain will be on that agenda, and that is our 5 adoption items. And so all those items that were voted on a proposal in February that are now out for public comment will come back to the board for adoption at their April meeting. And then in addition, we do anticipate currently also beginning at the April meeting, providing a standing update to the SBEC on educator misconduct matters now that we have our Inspector General on board. And then we do anticipate, I know Sandra had put a question in the chat around communication around exam timelines, requirements, an update there as folks are planning. And so just naming, we will have an update on that to present to the board during the April meeting, and we'll, circle back to this group to get additional input as well. Again, there may be a few additional items that are late additions to the agenda, but as of right now, that's what we've got on deck for April. Pause here before we wrap. If there's any additional questions that folks have. Oh, that is a good question, Kelsey. Beth, I don't know if you want to speak to kind of like the national board timeline or updates.
Happy to. We are a little delayed in the contracting, so we will not have an update in April, but we will be contracting with folks soon and have an update in July where they will present their report to the SBEC ahead of the July meeting, their initial report. So still plenty of time to meet the deadline in December.
Thanks, Beth.
Yep.
And Kelsey, we'll pull the date of the pre-board briefing and send it in our follow-up email to this group as well. I don't have it quite off the top of my head. Excellent. Well, again, really appreciate everyone's input throughout our meeting today. Again, really appreciate you all putting your questions and wonderings and input in the Padlet. That will be incredibly helpful to us as we begin to, not as we begin, we've been actively, but like continue to plan for implementation supports and future communication. We do have a survey that we would appreciate if you all would take here in our last bit of time together. That really helps us inform our approach for the meetings going forward. Our next meeting again will be in June. Yeah. Thanks, Katie. Appreciate the it was a long and robust meeting, a lot of discussion around meeting rule items, but again, just closing out again with that gratitude for for you all and your colleagues who've been really instrumental in making sure we've got some solid rules to implement going forward. But again, appreciate everyone. I hope everyone has a fantastic weekend, and we will see you all soon.